I want to talk about something that is a new workflow to use AI assisted tools, and it's called dual model context code review. That's a lot to put in one sentence, but I'm going to talk through how I use these workflows in developing software. So, first up, we have this idea of context, and it's very different than some of the tools that have been developed, like Copilot. Copilot, in some sense, is an experiment that probably has more of a downside than an upside. And the reason why is that it's constantly giving you suggestions that you may not want. What's probably a better workflow is to start to build something, or maybe initially get some instructions for something that you're helping with, and then go ahead and write that scaffold down. And that's how I typically develop things with Rust. Is I'll build a prompt that says, I want to have 50 lines of code only per file, a main.rs, a lib.rs, and then I want to build a command line tool. So I'll start with it, start to get a initial prototype working, and then I will feed the entire context. So that main.rs, the lib.rs, the readme file, maybe a test that I've developed, and then I'll ask a tool like Claude, for example, or AWS Bedrock that interfaces with Anthropic Sonnet. I'll feed it a huge context, and then I'll ask specific questions. For example, I want you to develop a feature for me, or I want you to build an integration test, or I want you to look at the README file and tell me what's missing, or I want you to add another flag to this particular command line tool. So it knows exactly what's happening inside of my project. But, and here's where the dual model approach comes into play, is that you can't always count on the fact that the model that you're working with, in this case, maybe it's Anthropic Claude, is perfect. There are some limitations that I've found in using these tools for real world development. Oftentimes, the way it was trained may contain a critical failure. For example, with Anthropic Claude, I found that regular expressions can be very poor, and no matter what you do, it will repeatedly give you a poor regular expression. Now, this is really annoying because it may work, let's say 95% of the time, but then you get this one part of your code base that uses a regular expression, and then now you have to do some kind of mitigation. Well, one of the things that we can do is actually leverage DeepSeek to code review what comes out of this workflow, this context-driven AI-assisted coding workflow. So the way I do this is that once I get a suggestion, I'll go over to DeepSeek locally. We can run DeepSeek R1 via Ollama. So I can say Ollama run, take in that code snippet that came from Anthropic Claude, or potentially also go to DeepSeek chat. I lean a little bit towards local models, and then say, I want you to code review this particular function, or I want you to code review this particular module and tell me if there are any critical failures. And what I found is that DeepSeek is pretty good at looking at other code examples from Anthropic Claude and then giving me some advice. Sometimes I'll do this as well with other models like Quinn, 2.5 Coder, or maybe I'll go to Google Gemini. But this idea of using other tools to code review what you're doing is such a different way to work than just blindly cutting and pasting code. So it's similar to before there were tools like this, just taking something from Stack Overflow, pasting it into production, and then hoping it works, right? That would be very dangerous. Likewise, when we're developing software with large language models, you have to be the person that is making the executive decisions. And so with this context-driven workflow, this gets us very close to getting good solutions, but not 100%. That last, let's say 20%, is where the second model could play a big role. And so using these revolutionary open or more open models like DeepSeek R1 is a good start to using this dual model approach. So you can do this today, right? You can use, let's say, Anthropic Claude, which has some pretty good artifact generation where it will store some of the things that you've been working on, get close, and then also ask another model, potentially a local model, which I think is really the future, is local models. Use Ollama, do Ollama run DeepSeek R1, and then paste in the code sample and ask for a code review. So when you're doing these dual code review type model workflows, you'll start to see that potentially this is an emerging workflow. It's, again, also not perfect. Doesn't mean that the second model will give you a perfect solution, but this could help to mitigate some of the problems that are inherent to models, right? They have model bias baked in, or maybe there's some kind of a censorship issue with one particular model. But if you go to a multi-model approach, you can actually get through some of the limitations with one model that is not present when you use lots of models at the same time. So this is effectively a distributed computing approach where you assume constantly that things have failure components to it, right? That always there's going to be a node that's down. And so by doing a proxy or building something on top, you can actually mitigate some of these issues that occur that are systemic, that happen with models. So in a nutshell, go ahead and try the dual model context review approach with both Claude and DeepSeek, and hopefully you use a tool like Ollama so that you can test out workflows that are running local on your machine as well.